Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Find a Moment podcast, where we navigate the space between ideals and everyday life. We are your hosts, Gretchen Roberts and Jennifer Ford, and we look forward to finding a moment with you today.
Hey there, welcome back to the Find a Moment podcast. Gretchen and I are here, and this is episode 3 in our summer book club series. We just finished up a couple episodes. If you've been keeping up with us, you know that we've read Keelia Clarkson's book called Chapter 1 Again. We discussed it in episode 1 of this series, and then our last episode to air was with Keelia Clarkson, who wrote that awesome book. And so we would love for you to follow along with us. We've got some fun social media posts that Gretchen, you have put together for us that go along with our summer book club content. So today we are starting episode 3, and this is a discussion about a book that is, Chapter 1 again was our fiction pick, and then this is our nonfiction pick. It is by Aundi Kolber, and it is called Try Softer. We have really gotten into some really interesting and timely conversations just with the personal things going on in our lives. It has been challenging and interesting, and I'm especially interested in hearing from you, Gretchen, what you, as a physician, just some of your thoughts and feedback on Aundi Kolber's conversation about emotions and the brain and the physical body and all of that, because she speaks with a clinical voice. Mm-hmm. And so we're going to have some interesting discussion on the things that stood out to us and kind of how we have interacted on a personal level with the book. So there we are. We're getting started. So this is going to be a 2-part conversation. So this is going to be part 1, and then our next episode, which will finish up our book club series, that will be the second part of the discussion that is on Try Softer. I hope I made that clear. Okay.
Yes. So we hope to do the first section of the book in today's episode, and then our next episode we'll have the second part of the book. So part 1 is the process of becoming, and part 2 is the practices to try softer. So today we're going to talk about the process, and then in our next episode we will talk about the practices.
Yes. And Gretchen, I've listened to all of this, the audiobook. Mm-hmm. I read the hard copy of Chapter 1 again, but I have done the audible version of Try Softer. So I wish that I had the hard copy to go back through and underline, but I did keep notes on my phone and in my notebook. So
good.
And I know we've chatted a good bit along the way too. So
yeah.
Do you want to kind of set up the beginning of this conversation? And I don't know if you want to kind of give an overview of each chapter or how you want to walk us through.
Yeah. So if you are following along with us, we put together a summer book club, kind of like a little notebook, some printable pages for you to work through some of the suggestions at the end of each chapter. Aundi has multiple questions or things that kind of like a homework kind of things for you to work on to kind of process what you had learned in the chapter. So there are 5 chapters in the process, and they are, but how long will it take? Mind your brain, attached, where earliest relationships matter, too hot, too cold, just right, finding your window of tolerance. And then part 1 concludes with chapter 5, boundaries bring us life. And so I feel like the first chapter, along with the introduction, it just kind of sets up what she means by try softer. And basically, I think kind of like a simplified explanation is everyone tells you, just try harder, just try harder. But she is introducing a concept called try softer. It is a way to take your whole personhood, your history, your story, your circumstances, and allow that to help you have emotional maturity and spiritual maturity and more self-awareness. And all of those things allow you the space to be softer. So it's not all just a help you be gentle kind of thing. It's more of a softer approach to yourself, to others, to your story, to their story, to the pain, to the struggles, to the traumas of life. What do you think? Does that sound like a acceptable summation.
Definitely. And I think every time she says try softer, and I say every time she says it because I've listened to the audio too. Every time I hear her say that, my brain is still kind of forming the definition of what that actually means as she kind of continues through the book. But as I was listening to you describe that and just the meaning of it, I'm thinking about myself and kind of my tendency when I feel sort of heightened emotions or particularly frustration, I tend to harden. I don't know that I'm trying harder, but I tend to become more rigid and more hardened in my approach, or that can be my default. And that's sort of a I wonder too, like how much of this is personality and different personality types and understanding ourselves, whether we're talking about Enneagram or Myers-Briggs or whatever. I do wonder too, I've thought like, okay, well, as a one on the Enneagram, like what information does that give me in the context of this book? But my default has typically been to harden when things get difficult. And I think that's just like a protective mechanism. I think I've told myself that it's fortitude, it's stoicism, it's you know maybe some little martyrdom things going on in there, but also it's very much protective, but in the context of relationships it can be really damaging. And so the idea of trying softer and relationships being not just external relationships with the people around us but also like our internal relationship with ourselves, trying softer, um, allowing ourselves to be softened and to not shut off and disconnect. How have you kind of experienced the idea of trying softer, and how has that definition kind of morphed and changed for you as you kind of read through the book?
I feel like I definitely, when I first heard the book mentioned, which was in our parenting series,
Mm-hmm.
I at first was thinking soft as in gentleness and thinking, okay, well, I feel like I'm fairly gentle. But that's kind of was my kind of initial thoughts about it. But it definitely has felt more of a softer, as in more understanding, more mature, more aware. Like she talks about the hyperarousal or hypoarousal when talking about like the window of tolerance. And I
Mm-hmm.
feel like a lot of times without emotional health and without emotional maturity, a lot of people, and myself included in the past, like we rely on either the hyperarousal, the being frustrated, the being angry with circumstances, with feeling like your heart rate go up and your blood pressure go up and all of that kind of hyper state. And then also people have the hypoarousal where they just check out and they don't communicate, they don't talk about feelings, and they've checked out. And so I feel like a lot of even adults like tend to go to those two places. So for me, the softer has developed more into more awareness and more understanding. And I feel like kind of the first like big thing for me in the first part of the book was the window of tolerance. And, I had not thought about my response to things and circumstances in relation to my window of tolerance before. And I
Mm-hmm.
think historically, I probably knew, like, there may be times that maybe I would be easily frustrated or things like that, or kind of when, it just takes one more thing to send me over the edge kind of thing. Then I would end up getting angry or getting frustrated or anything else in that hyper arousal list. And then I would feel defeated and feel guilty and feel shame for not being mature enough to handle whatever circumstances I was dealing with. And so having this new kind of way to look at that and to think we all have a window of tolerance. And especially like when we have a bunch of young children, like your lack of sleep, your lack of exercise, your lack of consistent nutrition, all those things play into your window of tolerance. And that is not an excuse, which I think I also went to a lot historically, like if I felt frustrated, then I didn't want to make excuses to say that I should be able to act that way or feel that way because X, Y, and Z is going on. I didn't want to be someone to make excuses. So I would just put it all on myself that I needed to work on myself and to try harder to not, you know, use that willpower, right? So understanding, having that self-awareness of kind of where you are and what you can do even in those moments to expand your window of tolerance. I thought that whole concept was very helpful for me. And it really gave me a new way of thinking about just how I approach daily life and daily circumstances and frustrations and all the things.
Mhm.
Did you relate to
The
the window of tolerance at all? Like, what were your thoughts?
Yeah, I definitely did. And it was helpful for me to have that title to put on what I was feeling, because I think in the past I've used language like I've reached my limit, and
Yes.
I'll go and Amelia just said, I hate when you say that. uh, but that's true. Like sometimes it's with her, sometimes it's Carrie, sometimes it's with Lucy, where I'll just say, like, I've reached my limit, and I'll go in my room and close my door. And what's interesting about your window of tolerance when it's in the context of a conflict with another person is that usually both people don't reach their window of tolerance. Like that you don't get beyond it at the same time. So one person is still locked in and the other person
Mhm.
says, you know what? I have gotten to the end of that window of tolerance. Like I'm going to have to take a break. And then that seems to kind of escalate things even further, because one person is withdrawing and setting a healthy boundary when the other person is maybe feeling shut down or shut off. And sometimes that even has to be like a physical barrier, like a door or stepping outside, or I'm going to go for a walk or whatever. I have definitely felt the window of tolerance, even since, I'll say window of tolerance, like kind of getting beyond that, because when you're able to stay engaged in that moment, that is, you're in your window of tolerance. It's when you're getting beyond that, when you feel yourself kind of pushing to the edge of that, that's where you have to start kind of taking a self-assessment and saying, she talks a lot about being embodied, like understanding what's happening in your body. I have a really hard time valuing that, and
Mm.
I also do not do it at all. I have one of my girls who will say, like, oh, when they're feeling big emotion, she'll say, I feel it in my head, or I had this feeling in my stomach, or my throat started feeling tight. And I'm like, you are that connected to your body. I feel nothing. Everything just kind of intellectualizes for me. It kind of
Mm.
mechanizes, which can also kind of strip me down to being very unemotional, which my family has definitely observed and articulated a lot, and it is not helpful. But when you're getting to that, like starting to get pushed towards the end of your window of tolerance, she talks about sort of taking a physical inventory
Mhm.
and what are some things that you can do to, like, she talks about grounding. And that's another one of those things where I'm like, oh, yeah, we don't have to do that. But it is so helpful. Like when we choose to do it, super helpful. And I had a situation not that long ago, and I think I had texted you about it, Gretchen. And I said, I got to my window of tolerance today. And
Mhm.
what I remember recognizing, I'm getting beyond that point. I'm getting close to it. I'm taking an inventory. I didn't like notice anything that I was feeling, but I did some kind of one of those little sensory things where you say, like, what are
Mhm.
5 things I can see, 4 things I can touch? And whatever the exercise was, I don't remember. It extended that window for me.
Wow.
It created an extension to what at one point had felt kind of finite. Like I see the end point, and instead of getting to a stop sign, I sort of had this kind of this extended road that let me keep going a little further. And in the situation, I was able to de-escalate, and it did not turn into a scenario where I had to walk away. But I
Mm.
also think about how many times do we as parents expect our kids to stay, if I'm not done explaining or lecturing or what disciplining or preaching at you, if I'm not done, but the child is done or the teen is done listening, am I willing to honor that window of tolerance? And is
Mm,
it right for me to expect my children to have a window of tolerance? Is it right for me to not honor that? Because you could also say, well, you just don't want to hear it. Well,
right.
no, maybe it's the way that I'm talking to you about it and your window of tolerance, and we can come back later and finish this conversation. So there's definitely some, I've got a teenager looking at me, giving me eyes like, that's not how it works. It's something I can work on. Definitely something I can work on, right? So definitely some application with parenting and just remembering
Definitely.
that all of these things are, we're so intricately wired, but we can't expect our kids to have mastered these skills that we are still learning from this book.
Right. And I think kind of what you were saying about, oh, your child just doesn't want to hear what you have to say or that. And I think there can be, it's kind of like when in our parenting series when we talked about, like smaller children, like our attitude towards them and like our belief about them, if we think a baby could be manipulating us for attention,
Oh, mm,
then that belief taints the way you see and interact with them. And I think, with our teens, if we kind of give them the benefit of the doubt of like how this book is talking about, like treating them as though that they are made in God's image and
mhm,
that they have these capacities and limits. And regardless of what somebody may say their motive is, like we have to see them and treat them in a way that honors them even
mm,
if they don't act honoring, because that's
mhm,
what God does to us. Jesus loved and served the people who were going to betray him to Judas, and
mhm,
he washed his feet, knowing what he was going to do.
mhm,
Our internal narrative about their motives, we have to
mhm,
work on that, I think, as parents too. And I went to church camp with our church's high school students on the medical team, and one of the messages I had shared with you, Jennifer, that the speaker was talking to them, and the whole theme of the week was sacred and teaching them about everyday moments, ordinary moments are sacred, and that each person in your life is sacred and made in God's image. And the speaker said to this room full of high school students, he said, "High school students, you are good." And the hush and the feeling that you felt in that room, it felt like for a lot of those students, they do not hear that. And it was hard for them to receive that. And I think that honoring someone else and this whole try softer process, like that's what it allows us to look at another person and say, you are good. God made you good. And I think we have become this culture of performance and productivity and comparison that there isn't, as she talks about later in the book, about there isn't anywhere that holds space. So I think approaching our children with the belief of you are good, God made
mhm,
you. You are made in his image. When God made man, woman, he said, this is good. And so
mm,
approaching them with that mindset allows us, I think, to honor their window of tolerance and to even talk about these things with them
mhm.
to lead to that emotional maturity, I feel like.
In at some point, I'm not sure what chapter it was in because I didn't note the chapter in my notes. I didn't write down what chapter this was in my notes, but it connects with what you're saying about the goodness, about that being formed and kind of written and scripted into our identity and the identity of our children. And she was talking about an example of a young person I'm not sure if this was an anecdote about someone else that she had worked with in her practice or if she was talking about herself, but they had heard the scripture, this preaching on the scripture that says we have to die to ourselves.
Hmm.
And the young lady had also endured a lot of childhood trauma, and she already felt like she had kind of, in a sense, like died to herself a long time ago because that was her survival. That was the only way that she was able to keep going, was to kind of put that part of her life, those hard things, those traumatic things, those hard memories, to sort of bury those. And so it also sent a message to her that that her emotions and her experiences as a feeling person, that those things didn't matter. And
Hmm.
that if she were to be a faithful Christian, those things had to be numbed, they had to be deadened, they had to be put away. And so that's something that I would kind of categorize along with the idea. We've talked about this some in our parenting series too. There's so much language on social media, like within the Christian parenting sphere, where parents are saying, we have to teach our children that they're broken little sinners.
Hmm.
And that is such a damaging narrative, because they're what they start to form in their own minds is like what they think about themselves and who they believe themselves to be. That language gets so deeply embedded, and they need to be hearing, you're good, you're good, you're good. Sometimes you're having a hard time, but you're good. And the same thing about God. Like, we have to be careful as parents the type of religious language that we expose our children to, and at what times, because if they're not ready, if they don't have a healthy identity formed about themselves and a healthy identity formed about who God is, that's then they're not able to understand and rightly process these other ideas about
Hmm.
righteous judgment and the wrath of God and fearing the Lord and the fact that we are sinners and that we do need a savior. So just her sharing that story about the girl who heard I have to die to myself, and then what that kind of, what message that sent to her about her emotional, the emotional part of herself and her experiences, it really just kind of bred this sense of shame,
Yes.
um, about herself and about the hard things that she still was struggling to kind of mentally accommodate. That was just kind of connecting with
Yes.
the goodness language.
And it's interesting in tying into that in the first chapter, like some of the homework that she gives is to do a timeline of your life.
Mm,
And so we have a printable one in the show notes. And I worked on that and I did kind of 10 years for each line and just kind of wrote down just kind of some major things. And the interesting thing that was convicting is when we were talking, I think it was our first episode, when we talked about chapter one again. And I was sharing the story about the fog and
mm,
being at the Grand Canyon. And I think you said something like, is that on your timeline?
mm,
And what I realized, I was noting on the timeline all of the difficult big T, little t traumas, all the hard things. And I hadn't put those beautiful moments of the Grand
mm,
Canyon. And so that goes along with we don't necessarily have to be told we're sinners. When we're writing our timeline, we
mm.
remember we are. Like we have to
Yeah.
be reminded of the good. So yeah, that just reminded me of that. I was like, oh my goodness, we are just so prone to focus on the bad and the hard and those kind of things as the markers, which we will
Mm-hmm.
get to that in the next episode of talking about the Ebenezers and the stones of help and remembrance, which I feel like are so important. But anyway, I don't want to get ahead of ourselves. So if you haven't done the timeline, I really found it helpful. And then especially as I went back in and wrote down just all of the gift God moments of his provision and faithfulness. And I had had some of those. I don't want to totally, it wasn't all negative to start with, but there were a lot of kind of Ebenezer stones to include on that timeline. So that is available if you all want to join us in that. With some of the language she uses in the beginning is she talks about compassionate witness. And I think as
Mm-hmm.
we're writing our story on the timeline or thinking about attachment, she talks a lot about early attachment with family and loved ones and people that you can trust. I think that that compassionate witness, I think, is another way to sum up the try softer philosophy also is that we are a compassionate witness of our own story and life,
Mm-hmm.
and we can be a compassionate witness to those in our life too.
Mm. The first time I ever heard that term was when we interviewed Catherine Fitzgerald for our grief series,
Yes.
compassionate witness and the power of that. And that sometimes that is the deal breaker for whether something becomes a trauma or just a hard thing,
Mm,
is if we have compassionate witness to help us feel seen and to help us move through it and to not be alone, because the trauma isn't always necessarily the event. It's the going through it alone
yes.
that is sometimes more damaging.
Hmm. In the response of the people around us, if we're met with
Mm-hmm.
shame or judgment, or
Mm-hmm.
like you said, absence of people going through that with you. Yeah.
Or diminishing. Oh,
Yes.
that's not a whatever. Oh, you
Right.
shouldn't feel that way. Oh, it's not a big deal. Oh, that happened to me too.
Mm-hmm. Oh,
Okay, thanks.
right. Right. Oh, so good. She goes on after window of tolerance. Another concept she talks about is containment, which is taking, like, if you are in a circumstance, like if you're trying to kind of increase your window of tolerance, if you're in a circumstance that instead of like, so recognize you're going through something that you need to deal with and that is kind of pushing you out of your window of tolerance. But if you can visualize a containment of a treasure chest, you're going to put that in, or a file cabinet, or a trunk, or something that you can mentally put that in and return to it later, that helps to contain whatever it is that you are going through. And it reminds me that Sally Clarkson has said so many times to me, I put that in the file drawer of heaven. And I think there's a lot of times we are ruminating on things, and that can allow us to have anxiety or even more hurt about something. And so realizing I have the autonomy and capacity to put that in the file drawer, to have that be
Mm-hmm.
contained. And then if I need to go back and revisit that later, I can. But there are some things I may just need to leave in the file drawer of heaven for God to figure out and work out. So I liked that concept.
Yeah. I feel you revisiting that is making me realize I don't know that I made this connection when I was listening to that section on the audiobook, but it's made me realize that maybe that's what I've done with some things, maybe unknowingly. And this book has made me kind of wonder, am I really just that unhealthy that I don't feel
Right.
things in my body? I don't have a really strong handle on like the embodiment of what I'm experiencing. There's a part of me that even struggles to value that. Like, I don't even know that I see that as something, gosh, I really need to work on that. There's a part of me that is very resistant to that because
Mhm.
I don't know that I want to feel things more. I already feel
Right.
things.
Right.
Like I have a finite, my energy, I feel like I already expend so much. So the idea of feeling more things, that does
Mhm.
not appeal to me. The idea of being healthy for myself and my family, that is appealing. So, anyways, hearing you talk about the containment part and the file drawer of heaven is sort of making me think. I mean, I know that I've done counseling and therapy work ever since my mid 20s after 9/11. And that was sort of the gateway that opened to discussing and kind of working through other hard things from my life up until that point. And we've been through a lot of marital and like family counseling type stuff. But sometimes I have kind of questioned, like, am I wrong to not still feel like I need healing with this thing, or do I have a callus in my heart? You know, a callus is a place where there's a lot of wear and a buildup of like this protective layer so that you don't feel pain. So it serves a purpose. Does that, because these things aren't painful, does that mean that I'm neglecting them? No, maybe I have just put them in the file drawer of heaven.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's, instead of saying, like, I don't feel these things don't, like, I don't feel a sensitivity about these things. I'm just kind of more, yes, this happened. Yes, I did that. Yes, this was really hard. But I have sort of this kind of matter of fact way of sharing
Mm-hmm.
about things. And I have wondered, is my heart hardened? Is my heart callous? Is that unhealthy? But maybe it's more like I have lived almost 50 years, and I have been told that I have the spiritual gift of faith, which means this kind of radical acceptance of God's plans and purposes. And I see the fruit of even the hard things in my life and the way that He's written my story, or allowed my story to be written in spite of the hard things. So sometimes I have wondered, should I have feelings when I think of these things or when I remember these things?
Mm-hmm.
And maybe it's that the file drawer of heaven is containing some of
Right,
that.
right. And so I think it definitely can just be, like you said, maturity and faith of going through that. If you aren't feeling feelings running amok, and which is, I feel like
Mhm.
what I feel a lot of times when I'm in that kind of, it sounds like you're more of the hypoarousal where you just
Mm,
check out and go to another room and that kind of thing. I feel like I'm more of this hyper arousal to where I feel like my emotions are running amok and I can't get control of them. And so it is like a mental act of containing these monkeys
mhm.
out in my brain and putting them in the cage kind of thing.
In the moment of the hard things, I speak of the containment, like the file drawer of heaven, of more of like the hard things from my past,
Mm.
like things that I went to therapy over, and, some really difficult things. But no, I definitely let my emotions get a hold of me now.
So you
So
have the
I
monkeys
let the,
too.
I do. She talks about pendulation later in the book, but
Yes.
it's not what I'm going to say, but it is very much like the visual of the pendulum. Like I'll get really angry. And I think anger is kind of one of the things that the Enneagram ones tend to wrestle with. But
Yes.
that anger is typically, it gets expressed outwardly in a situation that involves usually a relationship with somebody I love. It gets expressed outwardly, but it's really, the anger is that I don't know how to fix this. I don't know
Yeah.
how to make you happy. I don't know how to teach you this lesson. I don't know how to get this situation worked out. I don't know how to fix this. It's like this it's about me not knowing how to successfully navigate this
Mhm.
thing. So, I'll get angry. There will be plenty of words. Words will abound. A fountain of words, so many words.
All the words.
Lots of words. And then eventually, when things don't resolve, usually because I've gotten emotional, that's when I say, oh, I think some of that too is maybe futility for me, but also realizing, like, I don't want to continue to wreak havoc in my home, not just for the person who's involved, but the other people who live here.
Right.
There are seasons where I've definitely been unhealthier in terms of managing that. Yeah, that's an area where I've had to just really acknowledge the fact that I cannot just yell and give way to my anger.
Hmm.
But yeah, I do get emotional. And then that's when I say, I'm out of here.
Right.
The door closes or slams.
But don't you think that there are seasons like we of our lives that have different windows of tolerance? Like I think there's probably
Mm-hmm.
variability throughout the day with circumstances and situations, but I also
Mm-hmm.
think there are seasons to where I can look back and be like, I just had like this much margin.
Right.
And I
It,
wish now, like, I could go back, work on that window of tolerance and those things. And I think,
mm-hmm.
you hear things like, and we have said this, even I think in our health and wellness, there's like prioritize sleep and being
Mm-hmm.
outside and getting exercise. And so we know these things, but yet putting them into practice it's hard
Yeah.
when you have
And then
all
throw
the
some,
responsibilities.
yeah. And then throw some hormones in there, and you just don't know what you're going to get.
Yes. Yes.
It's kind of wild. Yeah, Amelia and I were talking about something today. I said, "Oh, if I could go back and parent you again as a little child, I would be so much better. Like I would do so many things differently." But that's also, I mean, that's just life. That's every season of
Right.
life. Like when she's 6 and she's like, "I've only been doing this kid thing for 6 years." I'm like, "Well, guess how many years I've been being a mom?" Like,
Right.
we're in this boat together, honey. This is hard.
And
This
then
is
it
hard.
makes us wonder, we have talked about, 20 years from now, and what we want to be
Yes.
like them, but then are we going to think in 20 years, I wish I
Mm,
would have, like we want to
I'm
always be
sure.
learning, and there are probably going to be so many things that
Yeah.
we'll be going over of, I should have done it this way. And so
Mhm.
kind of letting go of that perfectionism, which for a one Enneagram is
Hello.
struggle, right?
It's so
Um,
hard.
so the last section of part one is on boundaries. I will say there is a list, and I will tell you the page number, page 97 of simple ways to state a boundary. And I read that list and talk about feeling something in your body. Like I felt
Mm.
like I can't say these things. I realized, like, wow. So here are the five ways that she says simple ways to state a boundary. One, thanks so much for asking, but I'm not available. Two, sorry, that won't work for me. Three, I'm not comfortable with that. I think I'll pass. Four, you can handle it however works best for you, but count me out. And five is no. In the book that she recommends or she mentions in there is Cloud and Townsend's book Boundaries, which I
Mm.
have read several times and loved. So I know that that is a thing that I have had to work on a lot and really need to continue to work on. Do you have thoughts on the boundaries section?
So I have kind of a funny story about the Boundaries book. Carrie and I got married in November of 2006. And then a month later at Christmas, when we were doing family Christmas with his family, his parents gifted me a copy of the Boundaries book.
Oh, wow.
I think the rest of the family had already been given a copy at some point, and
Okay.
I was given a copy, which I just that was like my introduction to that book. I
Ah,
was like, what does this mean?
right.
Um, but that list of the boundaries, like those are things that are really easy to say, like to our children. Like the last one,
Mm,
no, just no.
right.
You don't have to understand it or agree with it to comply, but you understand no, and I'm done explaining it. So sometimes I'll explain so that you can to get the buy-in so that they understand I'm
Mhm.
not just being difficult. Other times it's just a no. Sometimes the no is based on a gut feeling, like I'm not able to really articulate clearly, but I am going to honor what my gut is telling me. My gut is just saying I don't have a comfort level with this right now.
Mhm.
And as I understand myself and kind of maybe where as I process a little bit more, I will give you like I'll give you access to what's going on in my mind, but right now it's just no. One place where I have gotten so good at saying no is like at stores where they want you to sign up for
Oh,
something or the credit card because you're going to get like 80% off,
right.
something ridiculous. And I'll just say, "Oh, thank you so much for asking. I think I'll pass today, though." I always say thank you for asking. And then with tipping, unless somebody is like actually serving my food, I used to feel really embarrassed about hitting zero, but now I have just gotten comfortable. And the boundary for myself is that if if somebody is serving me and I will see them again, I will tip. Otherwise, I don't.
Mhm.
Otherwise, if I don't kind of have that boundary for myself, then I'm kind of feeling uncomfortable with having to make that decision every time. So I just had to kind of say, this is when I tip, this is when I don't. So those are a couple places. I have had family situations like extended family where I have not set boundaries and I regretted it later, but I didn't feel like some of our recent conversations, Gretchen, like I just didn't feel like I had permission. I felt so
Mm.
much pressure to go along. And the things that I was going along with weren't necessarily bad or wrong or hard. They just weren't the best fit for not just for myself, but for my family. Sometimes people have expectations, for example, family will have expectations for what you will contribute to a certain holiday or an event
Mm.
when you realize I feel like I'm being taken advantage of. I feel like I'm being told what to do. And this doesn't feel like I wasn't invited or I wasn't asked. I have essentially been dictated. This is your task list,
Hmm.
which in some ways I'm happy to do. I'm just here to serve. I'll serve whatever's needed. That's fine. But sometimes there are circumstances where that's just not, whether it's physical illness or family, taking care of my own family, then throw in some travel dynamics in there too, some financial limitations. It just can create this entanglement of this scenario that you just feel. For myself, I have felt really trapped inside
Yeah.
and still not felt permission to make the decision that was best. And interestingly enough, we had a situation earlier this year where I just felt so much turmoil about this decision that involved family and plans and expectations and a celebration and just all these logistics and just a lot of really important things that were not lining up. And interestingly, Amelia was part of one of those conversations and she said, well, what if you just do this? And I realized, why did I not think of that? And it
Mm.
ended up being the ideal solution. And not everybody was happy about it. And
Right.
yes, people made comments about it to us and to our
Mm.
family, like, oh, too bad this. But I still had so much peace knowing, first of all, she helped us make a really good, I would not have thought of that.
Hmm.
Also, knowing this is one of those cases where we actually did choose what we knew was best for us. Sometimes there was a lot of freedom in that, but there were still so many different things about that were hard.
Yes.
Family things and not wanting to disappoint, especially when
Right.
it's family that you don't see very often. And I don't know,
Yeah,
it's hard things.
it really
What
is.
about what about you and your, because you were saying like you were reading the boundary list and you felt like the language and you like felt it in your body.
Yes.
What was that like?
I think a lot of the reason for it maybe is that I don't want to disappoint people. And I also want to do all the things. And a lot of times that comes at the expense of kind of my own family at home because I can give and give and give, and then they're left with me with no window of tolerance. But that is not fair to them either. And so I really have to learn how to protect my time to a degree and my family relationships and have kind of those boundaries set. And I think also with homeschooling and not having like a designated full-time job that like I go to somewhere. So it's kind of like I'm doing air quotes, like always available, right? Because I don't work kind of thing. And so realizing like, no, I can't always be available for all the things as much as I want to be. And so I've tried like with homeschooling to have the boundary of like in the mornings, as of 9 o'clock, I put my phone in the drawer and I'm not going to check it. It's really, really hard because then it's, one of the older kids calls, or, and then you miss something. And I'm even thinking about going into this new school year of just praying about, okay, what boundaries do I need to put in place
Mm,
so that I I have the script. And I love the way that she talks about the boundary script. And that's also in our show notes, little summer book club journal, is to write your own boundary script. And I love how you said, even kind of like practicing at the checkout when, do you want to give a donation to this or do you want to sign up for this? And those are maybe easier places for me to like practice saying no. So yeah, finding ways to practice it and so it can become more natural and also to already have that script in your mind, whether
Mhm.
it comes to like your school time or maybe it's your work time or your family game night or whatever kind of things that you need to set a boundary around and protect,
Mhm.
to already have that script and narrative planned so that you're not having to decide in the moment and let emotion guide you.
Mhm. You know what? I'm just now remembering a time that this was so long ago, and I can't even remember what the thing was, but it was something that you and I were both going to. This was before we became really close friends, probably back during Mom Heart days at your house.
Mhm.
And we were both going to the same place. And I texted you and I said, "Do you want to ride together?" And you said, "Oh, I would love that car time with you. I have already committed to whatever it was." And
Ah,
what I remember you doing is you honored my desire for connection. And so I'm just now realizing like that's whenever I've had to, and I don't really know that that's necessarily a boundary. It was just declining,
mhm.
it wasn't a boundary that like, yes, you were available, but it's still a no. It was just like you just
Right,
already had
right.
plans or whatever, or you didn't want to get car sick with my driving. Because I probably didn't know at the time that you get
That
car
I
sick.
have to drive.
It was the honoring first of the
Mm.
invitation and the heart behind it. And so I have used that as a way, like that's kind of become my template for anytime I have to decide. I
Oh,
would, I would love to have that time with you, or I would love to, whatever it is.
right.
It's making it relational
Mm-hmm.
and then just saying like it won't work out this time or whatever. But I do remember that. But maybe that does kind of transfer into some of the other kind of boundary language that I use in other places. And
Mm-hmm.
I have set boundaries with my family, saying things like, "Oh, I would love to stop by. Just I don't think it will work out with the time and whatever the scenario is."
Mm-hmm.
But boundaries can be very hard. I feel like it's easier to assert boundaries with the people that I live with, and I don't always assert them in the softest way. Like sometimes
Mm.
it's just no. And so that's something that I've had to think too. Like, would I talk to Gretchen like that? Would I talk to
Mm-hmm.
the Amelia shaking her head no? But I mean, that's a good check too. Like,
Yes.
do I assert boundaries with my family, with my immediate family, the people who we lived together with? Like, do I assert boundaries in with the same care that I would the person at the checkout line or
Mm-hmm.
the server or, whoever the other person is? I don't know. That's just something that I have to remind myself of.
Mm-hmm. Other thoughts you have on part one? Have we talked about everything that you had in your notes?
Uh, Let me make sure. A lot of discussion about mindfulness, and
Mm,
that is something I use the word awareness a lot, like being self-aware.
yes.
And we've talked about different relationships where we can see that there's a lack of self-awareness. And I think that's something that I think for some people it just comes more naturally. I don't know that it's necessarily a thing that only comes through like intentional cultivation of mindfulness and self-awareness. So I think some people have to work harder at it than others. But the mindfulness that she's talking about, she goes into such a broad and deep explanation of that. And I feel like that's a ribbon that kind of goes throughout the whole book is the
Hmm.
mindfulness and the
Definitely.
attentiveness and all of that to the body, the emotions, all of those things. But
Hmm.
mindfulness is definitely a common, I'll
Hmm.
call it a theme throughout the book that I
Right.
felt maybe I'm not super mindful.
Mm.
It made me kind of ask the question. And I don't know that it's maybe I am mindful, but there's just nothing going on in my body,
Hmm.
or so there's nothing for me to really detect, or is it that I'm just not being mindful? Or is it that I'm just disconnected? Like what
Mhm.
what exactly is that? Like what are those layers or the different things that
Right.
are factoring
Yeah.
into that?
Just talking about the body and how you mentioned kind of the neurology component that she brings up. And I feel like this is very similar to the book, The Body Keeps the Score,
Mm,
in the way that it, talks about how, and this is definitely not, I mean, The Body Keeps the Score is so in depth and it's very kind of more of a medical focus and maybe less of a therapy focus.
mhm,
So I feel like this is a great kind of intro to that whole concept of all the things that we have gone through make us
mm,
who we are, and everything on that timeline,
mm,
it affects us in some way. And not that and I think this was one of my hesitations with the timeline and initially in the book was I do not want to have a victim mindset
mhm,
at all. Like I want to feel that I have healing and freedom from circumstances and past and all of that. And I feel like I have that and I feel like I'm in a healthy place. And so I was a little wary, I think, of, oh no, is this kind of a trauma victim exercise scenario kind of thing? And I definitely as I went through, I did not feel that at all, that it was, and I loved the faith component that I think as a believer is so integral in all of this. And so I feel like the church, and I think we've referenced this a lot before, that maybe historically the church has not entered into kind of the neurobiology, the neurodevelopmental processes, and all of that kind of therapeutic and just this understanding. And I think it's a shame that we haven't, but I love that we are in that place now, that I feel like there is an awareness growing in believers that God made our bodies. He made our nervous system. Like he
mhm,
would not want us to just totally deny that in
mhm,
relation to our children or to ourselves. So I appreciated that fact. And I was thankful that that victim mentality, for lack of a better description.
mhm, mhm.
Did you have any hesitations going into it, or have you felt any hesitations through part one?
I will say it's harder for me not having the hard copy of the book. I think it's harder for me to because I don't have the pages to flip back through. Another note that I have is about that scientifically we know that there are parts of the brain, parts of gray matter that expand. So the parts that grow in mass, so the parts of the brain that we use on a frequent, regular basis, they actually increase in size. And so that's something that I've heard Andrew Huberman talk about as well.
Hmm.
But I just love all of the neurobiology and all of that you talk about. And it is very true that there are people who really discount the developmental parts of
Hmm.
um, that really should matter when it comes to parenting and how we choose to discipline. Talking about mindfulness, she mentions this too in the second half of the book. I don't want to get too far into it, but the mindfulness piece, David writing the
Mm,
Psalms, talk about mindfulness. He was
right.
just so, my soul is downcast, my body aches and groans within me, like the degree of mindfulness. So I definitely don't have that kind of mindfulness going on. And I don't know if that's just maybe indicative of, I feel like I'm kind of all over the place right now, but I like with this conversation, but I will say, I think that has hindered my maybe not receptiveness, but I don't know that I necessarily connect with the need to put into practice a lot of this, although the window of tolerance and the grounding thing, like I've already shared, that was very helpful in a very real situation. Like I absolutely benefited from it. It's not like something that you have to keep practicing and then it starts to kind
Hmm.
of take root. It actually worked in the moment the first time I did it. Yeah, I think there's some people who are just very comfortable with being in touch with the emotions in the body, and then there's other people like me where I think it just takes a little bit more work to not even to do it, but to want to do it
Yeah.
because it feels like a lot.
Yeah.
feel like the idea of feeling more deeply and, maybe uh, trying to scan my body and feel like, is anything hurting? Is anything tight? And maybe part of it too is like I've lived with chronic back pain for so long that I'm kind of disconnected from my body so that I don't have to kind of constantly be feeling that in a way that kind of disrupts my day. So
Mm, that's
I don't know.
interesting.
There's
Yeah.
a lot there.
Well, and I do kind of wish that in that part one that there would have been a section about like personality because if you are an INTJ, like some of my sweet family members, versus if you're an ENFP, with Myers-Briggs, like, you are going to read this book very differently. And
Mm-hmm.
so that awareness of if you're a thinker or a feeler, and then for you as maybe more of a thinker or more balanced, maybe you're just more balanced in the T and the F, that whereas me, this huge feeler, I may feel like, oh my goodness, yes, this and this and this. And
Mm-hmm.
for you, that's just, it's not a relatable for some of those things. So I wish that there was I wonder if we could talk to her, which unfortunately we are not bringing her in on the
That would be
next
great,
episode,
though.
but that would be great. But I would love to hear her thoughts, and maybe I could find a podcast that she's been on if she talks about personality. But I
Mm-hmm.
would love to hear how she thinks personality plays into trying softer, because I
Mm-hmm.
think it would be it's a huge difference
Mm-hmm.
in the application of a lot of this and the understanding and then, all of that with regards to personality.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned the body keeps the score. She also mentions that, and I think it's in the second half of the book. But
Oh, yeah.
that's another one that she had mentioned.
And she also mentioned in the first section, in the first part, she mentions Henri Nouwen's Life of the Beloved, which
Mm-hmm.
I absolutely love all of his writing on Beloved. And I've read several different, whether it's kind of a small paper or a talk that was put into a book of his, but wow, his ability to explain what it means to be the beloved and to be God's child. I mean, it's really life-changing. So we will link those books too. So the books that she references, we will link those in our show notes page too, because they are great resources.
Mm-hmm.
So this has been a great discussion, kind of laying the groundwork of part one of kind of understanding a lot of these kind of a lot of new terminology we got to explore on this one.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm excited to come back and talk again about part two, where we get to practice all these things.
This has been a great discussion. I'm definitely realizing I don't want to do a book club again without having the hard copy. So if you're listening and you're doing the Audible, that is totally fine. But the hard copy, I would say I wish I had saved the hard copy for the nonfiction and done the Audible with the fiction.
Yeah. Which
Uh,
I had the hard copy of chapter one again, but
mhm,
I want to hear the audible because I love Kelia's voice. I want to get that just, for a car trip or something to hear her reading it because I'm sure it's so good. She's just so articulate.
yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining us for this part one discussion of Try Softer. And we will have our final episode for our summer book club series coming soon. And that will be the second half of the book, us discussing Try Softer. So thanks for finding a moment with us, and we will talk to you soon.